Now we're going to talk on the bits that work on the corner of the horse's mouth and on the bars of their mouth. And they're called snaffle bits. This is an example of a D-ring snaffle bit here. You can see that it breaks in the middle, and this allows for a little bit of pressure to be released on the horse's mouth and on their tongue. And you can see that the connection to the side is firm, and there's the flexibility at the top of the D that allows it to go back and forth. This right here is a snaffle bit that's called a rubber bit snaffle. It's a little larger in diameter. It's a little softer on the horse's mouth than this particular snaffle we have right here. And the diameter of the mouthpiece is very important, because the larger the diameter, the softer it is on the horse's mouth. The smaller it gets, or the smaller diameter, the more severe the bit can be, and you have to use a little bit softer hand or have a little bit more experience when you're riding a horse with a bit that has a smaller mouthpiece in it. I'll show you some examples of that here in a minute. This is a twisted wire Western snaffle bit that you use in a young horse to help start its training and make it start to learn how to give its head and go side to side with direct pressure being put on the bit. You can see that it breaks in the middle, but the thing that distinguishes it has twisted wire right here, which gives you a little more feel to the horse's mouth and makes the horse a little bit more responsive to what you're asking them to do. It's a smaller diameter, but it's not so small that it's going to be too severe. We just put the twisted wire snaffle in this horse's mouth, and you can see that this bit sits right at the corner of her mouth. So when I pull on it, it's going to put a little pressure in the corner of her mouth, and it's also going to put a little pressure on the bars of her mouth, which is that interdental space between her incisors and her molars. Same principle applies here that we had with the rope hackamore, that when I pull on it a little bit, she gives me her face, gives me her head, and moves down, and I release immediately when I do that. So it works differently because it puts pressure right here by direct pressure of the rein on the corners of her mouth and the bars of her mouth. This here is an example of an O-ring snaffle bit that has a twisted wire mouthpiece. You can tell that because it has an O here for the ring, and then the mouthpiece is a twisted wire like we had before. It's also free moving on the ring. It's not welded to it or fixed on the rings on the side. So again, this one will have a little bit more feel to it than a smooth mouth, but still not very severe. This right here is an example of an English snaffle bit on an English headstall. It's a D-ring, as you can see here, it makes a D, and it's a twisted wire snaffle as well. But you can see that the twisted wire on this one is much larger, so it won't be near as severe in the horse's mouth as you're asking them to move along and give their face. Most snaffle bits are ridden with light contact, and that's why they're used a lot on English horses and hunter horses, because most of those horses are ridden all the time with light direct contact on their mouth. This is a full cheek snaffle bit with a large diameter mouthpiece. You can see that the shanks on the side are pretty long. You would use this bit in a horse where you want them to have some feel on the sides of their face when you're pulling on them, because sometimes young horses, you can pull the rings of a regular snaffle bit into the corners of their mouth. This will prevent that, give you a little bit more feel, a little bit more pressure on the side, and it kind of mimics that hackamore that we talked about before on having that side pressure. These rings will put a little side pressure on the horse's face. This is an example of a gag bit or an elevator bit. You can see that the headstall goes between the openings in the rings, and it's a smooth mouth gag bit. And the way this works, or sometimes it's called an elevator bit, because it's used a lot on horses that need to have elevation, or you need to get a little more pull on them. They're not flexing at the pole and giving their face to you. This will give you a little bit more leverage in which to do that. When you pull on them, you can help lift them up, get them up in frame, make them give their face back to you, and really frame them up like you might want a dressage horse to be, or a saddle seat kind of horse that you really want that horse to have a lot of lift and a lot of elevation. But you have to have an experienced rider use this. You can really get a lot of pressure on that horse's mouth, so you need somebody with experience that's using an elevator bit or a gag bit such as this. This is an example of a Kimberwicke bit that's used on hunt horses or English style horses. You can see that it has a couple of places you can attach the reins, but what really makes it different is it has a curb chain that snaps on and goes under the horse's chin. so that you have a little bit more control and a little bit more pressure that you can put on underneath the horse's chin when you pull on that reins using the snaffle bit action that's located in the middle or the mouthpiece part of this Kimberwicke. So it's a little bit more, gives you a little bit more control, particularly if you have to have a horse that you need to have a little more stop on or control. This will help you do that. And you see a lot of hunter horses riding in these types of bits.